At my graduation dinner, I thought I'd finally get a moment of peace. Instead, my dad raised his glass, laughed, and said, "You're old enough to pay rent or get out." Everyone else chuckled like it was a joke, but it wasn't. The very next day, I packed my things into a U-Haul, drove to my new house, and told them I was done paying their bills. That's when their faces turned pale because they knew the truth was about to break them wide open. I'm Callan Rhodes, and this is my story. But before I share it with you, I'd love to know you're here with me. Drop a simple hi in the comments, or let me know where you're watching from. I love seeing how far my story can reach. Thank you. And now, let me tell you everything. If my story touches you, please don't forget to subscribe. It costs nothing, but it means the world to me, and it helps my voice be heard. At the Darrell K. Royal Texas Memorial Stadium, heat lifts off the bleachers like a mirage. Orange tassels flicker, brass horns blare. My name is a quick bright flare in a sea of names, and for a breath I believe I'm finally clear of it all. The notices, the cutoffs, the late-night math I do in my head when the room is dark and the house needs everything. Mom sobs into a tissue mascara, smudged and proud. Dad doesn't look up. Thumb moving screen, glowing neck bent at the same angle I've known since I was 15. I pretend I don't see it. I smile for photos, hold the diploma, feel the paper shake just a little in my hands, and promise myself I won't ruin my own day by saying what's been true for years. I tell myself later. Later is Vespaio on South Congress, a narrow table, a little candle guttering between us, the smell of garlic and tomato and money I earned. Dad flags a server with 2 fingers jokes about the long name on my diploma, like the joke is on the world for thinking I did this on my own. Our son's a big deal, he tells the server. Data analytics. Mom adds like a charm against another bad month. Finn scrolls, taps a heart, lifts his eyes just long enough to grin at me and say the heat today was brutal. I laugh because that's what we do. We laugh, and it buys us a few minutes where the floor doesn't tilt. We toast. Everyone clinks. Dad sets his glass down and keeps his face bright when he says it. You're old enough to pay rent or get out. He says it like a line from a sitcom waiting for the laugh track to cue, and there it is, quick soft chuckles around the table except mine. Something peels back in my chest. 12 years of deposits hum behind my ribs like trapped bees. I don't throw the number yet. I just look down at my phone, open the spreadsheet I've updated across a dozen managers and 2 student IDs, line after line of transfers totals that balloon, and refuse to be forgotten, an anti-souvenir of growing up. The round number in the corner of the screen hits like a rung on a ladder I've been climbing in the dark, $105,000. I lock the screen. I slide the phone away. I nod like I'm thinking. I'll cover tonight, I hear myself say, because the reflex is old and wired in. Dad laughs bigger breezier, the world's best MC. Knew you'd take care of it, he says. That's when the light kicks up again on his own phone, a little blue banner blooming across the top edge, team names, odds a red dot pulsing. I don't say anything. I don't even blink. The server drops the check. I reach for it. Mom's hand hovers, wanting to stop me, not stopping me. I pull my card, sign my name, and let the candle burn down to a gold collar. Outside South Congress heaves with August, the street a warm river of bodies and neon. Music lifts from a doorway. A slice of pizza steams in a kid's hand. A bat cracks somewhere over the bridge, or maybe it's just my ear finally ringing. I step to the curb, pull up a blank text, and type a sentence I've never let myself say out loud. Enough. I hit send to myself and watch the bubble leave the screen, a tiny blue seed crossing a space only I can see. I walk toward the parking lot with the steady calm of a person who has already made the most dangerous decision of his life and knows he won't take it back. I don't look over my shoulder. I don't wobble. If anyone asks later, I will say the night was beautiful, that the sky was close, that the lights felt like a road. But what I will mean is that I was already gone, and the bill on the table was exactly what it felt like, the last drop, the surface tension breaking everything, spilling wherever it needed to go. And if you want to know how I left without blowing everything up right there, the answer is simple. I carried the bomb out in my pocket and set it down somewhere I could watch it from a safe distance. The first crack didn't sound like glass. It sounded like a porch swing creaking when there was no wind. Hyde Park summers sit on your lungs. Sprinklers click. The craftsman porch holds the day's heat like a body. I was 15 the first time I heard the chain complain for no reason. I stepped outside with a glass of water and saw it a gentle sway 1 inch either way, as if someone had just stood up from a conversation they didn't like. Inside, the TV was on a game that wasn't ours, and Dad was telling Mom everything was temporary. The startup cut him loose that spring. Bridge funding fell through, he said, making a joke about the word bridge and how bridges are supposed to hold. Mom picked up extra shifts at Book People, started bringing home paperbacks with cracked spines for us, underlining phrases the way some people underline scripture. Bills stacked on the kitchen counter like mail you keep meaning to send back to the past. Electric, internet, mortgage. I learned the due dates before I learned how to drive. I learned which envelopes to open first. At 16, I got hired at Joe's Coffee, took the early shift that paints your hands with espresso and dawn. At 17, I added a few nights stocking at the grocery humidity, flattening my hair by the time I clocked out. I handed Mom cash every month, $450 counted crisp, because I didn't want her to feel the weight of coins. She smiled like it embarrassed her to take it. She took it anyway, because that's what keeping the lights on costs: a little embarrassment and a lot of pretending you're fine. We were always fine in public. That was a rule nobody wrote down. There were backyard BBQs where the grill smoke curled into trees, and neighbors asked about Dad's next big thing, and he said working on it with the same wink he used when a bet almost hit. One afternoon, I came home to see a brand new 4K TV angled in a corner where the old one used to hunch and hum. Neighbors wandered in with beers and compliments about the crispness, the clarity, the stability of the Rodess. I stood near the sliding door and watched the porch swing tick on a breathless day, 1 inch either way, like a metronome only I could hear. SXSW arrived like a tidal wave of music and excuses. The streets congested. The sky felt loud. At a food tent behind a stage you could feel in your teeth, I cut through a line for bottled water and saw Dad sideways under a string of bulbs, phone cupped in both hands, thumb-tapping numbers that weren't contacts. He wasn't watching a band. He was watching a box turn green, then red, then green. I could have walked up and said anything, but Mom was 2 steps away talking to a friend from church about volunteer sign-ups, and I saw the tight ring of muscle at her jaw. She had been holding the day together since breakfast. I swallowed what I had seen, tasted copper, and told myself there would be a better time to say it. Better times came and went. Finn turned 10, then 11, then 13, grew his hair, found guitars online, and fell in love. On his birthday, the guitar he wanted appeared glossier than my future, its strap still smelling like a store. He grinned and kissed Mom's cheek and said something that made her pull him close for a second. I was happy for him. I was angry at everything. Those are not opposites. They just bruise in different colors. By then, I had learned the choreography. Someone knocks at the front door. Dad steps out onto the porch to speak in a voice meant for one person. Mom busies herself with a tray or a towel. I load a dishwasher that doesn't need loading. The swing squeaks once like a throat clearing. A neighbor, nice man, old shirt with a paint smear, made a soft remark to me one afternoon while he watered a flower bed. Your dad's good for it, just needed a little something to tide him over. The hose flinched in his hand and sent a spray across the grass. I pretended to squint at the sun. I pretended not to do the math. When I finally went to Mom with the fear that had been nesting in me all summer, his phone, those apps, the long looks, the first thing she did was set down her pen and steady herself against the kitchen counter. Don't, she said, and her voice cracked on the consonant. Do not embarrass your father. She wasn't angry. She was afraid. Afraid that pointing at the hole would widen it. Afraid that asking for help would look like failure. Afraid the neighbors would stop showing up and the porch would empty and the house would echo when we spoke. She loved us in the hardest way I've ever seen, a way that kept the front door pretty and the inside oxygen thin. That was the night I understood something heavy and simple. She was part of the mask, because sometimes the mask is the only tool you have left. So I worked. I pulled shots of espresso until the machine's sigh felt like a friend. I learned how to fold a fitted sheet with one person and a hall floor. I put my name on every extra shift that didn't crush my grades, and I slid $450 across the counter on the 15th like a ritual you don't challenge because you fear the priest is right. We were stable on paper. We were a picture frame. People came over and said we had a good son and a promising younger one, and a house that smelled like lemon oil and belief. And every so often when the wind forgot to move, the porch swing creaked by itself, and I felt the future shift 1 inch either way. There were moments when the math frightened me. When I opened the electric bill and saw the bump from running the air high while we hosted. When I watched Dad crack a joke at a BBQ while a notification I couldn't quite see glowed on his phone. When Finn's amp arrived with the box still warm from the delivery truck. Those were the nights I lay awake and listed each envelope in my head like a rosary and promised that if I got out, I'd pull us with me. Not by becoming richer or louder, but by getting honest enough to stand the silence that follows truth. Years later, when the diploma touched my palm and the stadium roared, I felt that same old swing twitch. I knew before I knew. Maybe that's why I didn't flinch when he said rent or leave over pasta and candles. Maybe that's why I signed the check with a steady hand. The porch had been telling me how this ends since I was a kid, not with a crash. With a slow, exact creak you can't unhear once you finally admit it's there. And if you're wondering how long I planned to be loyal while the story was sugared for company, I can answer that now without blinking until I learned that loyalty isn't love when it sets itself on fire to keep the room warm. The West Campus fridge was a white cave with 3 items that felt like a personality test, half a jar of peanut butter, a bottle of hot sauce, and a lone apple that turned soft at the edges before I could get to it. On the door, I taped a handwritten schedule so dense it looked like I was studying for a life I didn't have time to live. Morning shifts at Joe's Coffee, evenings at the grocery, weekend hours at the admissions office on campus, where I smiled at strangers' parents while calculating due dates in the back of my head. Every month I moved between $600 and $900 out of my student account and into the mortgage and utilities at Hyde Park. I kept the confirmation emails in a folder titled Receipts, as if proof could also be shelter. Sometimes after exams, we'd end up at Zilker Brewing metal chairs wobbling on concrete, warm lights strung overhead, a band crooning through a set the way a fan hums on low. Friends joked that I must have it easy, that my folks probably picked up half my tabs. I took a long drink and said nothing. It's a strange form of love to let people be wrong about you because the truth would take a whole night and might ruin theirs. Nico, who ran Joe's like a ship and cared for people the way good captains do, didn't let me dodge. We were counting tips when he said it plain. "You're being used," he said not unkindly. "Not because they're bad people. Because nobody told you where the line goes, so you put it wherever they ask." He wrote down the name of Austin Telco on a napkin and told me to open an account nobody else could touch. A little every week. Pay yourself first. Then the world. At the Austin Telco counter, a woman with a gold nameplate slid a form toward me like she was handing over the first clean sheet I'd ever seen. I signed the pen, skidding in a place where my hand shook, and set up an automatic transfer for $100 a week. It wasn't much. It was a light that came on in a long hallway. Through a flyer at the community center, I found Selena Brooks, whose office had a potted plant that seemed to be thriving on nothing but fluorescent light and determination. She drew a line on a legal pad, wrote support on one side and me on the other, and started building a plan with the calm of someone who believes the ground will hold. We mapped rent and groceries, projected income from Joe's and the admissions desk, and then penciled in numbers for the future, like you'd pencil in a draft you're scared to make permanent. "We'll taper what you send home," she said. "Not because you're cruel, but because you don't jump off a sinking boat to swim back under it." She gave me a reading list on index funds and compound interest, then slid over a glass of water like she knew I was dehydrated in more ways than one. In my final year, I pressed a shirt, borrowed a tie, and walked into DataWave with a resume that felt like a ledger of very long days. Interviews always feel like small theater, but for once the script fit. They talked about models and pipelines and messy real-world data. I talked about making sense of noise and how pattern recognition is just a fancier word for growing up the way I did. When the offer landed $80,000 a year with a $12,000 signing bonus, I stared at the email until my eyes watered. Not because it solved anything, but because I could see the shape of a solution. Around then, Jasper Cole appeared in my inbox with an easy hello and a list of starter homes that didn't look like the joke you tell yourself when you're young. We stood on Laurel Street in East Austin, sun-high cicadas loud, and walked through a small house that smelled like pine, and maybe bread, if you were hopeful. The backyard had a patch of earth where someone once loved growing things. In the corner, a small surge of color violets holding on in heat that should have chased them out. I put my hand on the fence and felt the hum of a neighborhood where people carried their own groceries and waved anyway. I pictured a desk by a window and shoes by a door and a sink where dishes could be washed right after dinner because nobody was coming over just to be impressed. The first-time buyer program turned paperwork into a mountain. I climbed in a pair of cheap sneakers. I signed for the inspection with palms damp, signed for the appraisal with a heartbeat in my throat, signed the final stack with a notary who kept candy in a bowl and told me I'd done a brave thing. I kept the purchase to myself. Not out of malice, out of self-preservation. Secrets are heavy, but sometimes they weigh less than a fight you know you'll lose. During those months, the math at home bent in ways I couldn't ignore. A neighbor from 2 doors down waved me over while he coiled a hose, eyes kind, voice careful, and mentioned that Dad had borrowed $5,000 just to tide him over. I nodded and thanked him as if he'd brought a casserole, then went home and stared at my phone until the numbers aligned with a different story. Transfers into an account I recognized from a different kind of notification. Bets that looked like rescued dogs when they won, and like holes in drywall when they didn't. The ground inside me shifted a degree enough to change a horizon. One night at the kitchen table, our old kitchen lemon oil and a bowl of fruit arranged like a magazine spread, Mom told me she had moved some of what I sent to cover a barbecue for the neighborhood and a few nice things so people wouldn't worry. Her hands trembled when she said it. She talked about how shame isolates, how people pull away if they smell collapse. I watched the way her eyes shone with love for us and fear of the world, and understood that intention and impact can live in different houses on the same street. I didn't yell. I didn't even sigh. I went for a walk and counted the porch lights on the block gold squares in the dark and promised myself I would build a life with a front door that didn't require costumes just to answer it. With each weekly transfer into that small account, I felt something return that debt had been renting from me, a voice that didn't panic at the first sign of trouble. I bought a second-hand suit jacket that fit in the shoulders and kept my resume updated like a person who expects to be needed. I priced insurance and walked away from overpriced sneakers at the mall, comforted by the fact that my old pair still knew my feet. When the house on Laurel finally became mine, I stood in the empty living room and listened to the way sound moved. No TV blasting a game I didn't watch. No laughter rising for people who didn't live there. Just the faint buzz of a ceiling fan and the distant bark of a dog and my own breath showing up on time. I thought about the porch swing at Hyde Park, how it moved even when the air refused to, and told myself I'd earned a porch that only spoke when the wind did. I didn't tell them. Not yet. Timing isn't just about calendars. It's about whether the room you enter is capable of hearing you. The question followed me from desk to car to grocery line. How long could I keep a life this important quiet without losing some part of myself to the silence? Each time I pushed the thought away, it came back shaped like violets, small, stubborn, and undeniable. The morning after the dinner on South Congress, the air felt like you could drink it. I rented a U-Haul, the kind that makes you feel both competent and like you're pretending to be your father for a day. I loaded 3 suitcases, 5 boxes of books, 1 lamp, and a battered saucepan that had fed 2 lifetimes. When I pulled up at Hyde Park, the porch swing was still. In the doorway, my family made the shapes we have always made, Dad's jaw set, Mom's hands folded. Finn somewhere between curiosity and a joke he hadn't decided to tell. "I'm moving out," I said, "and I'm done paying the bills." The silence was so complete I could hear the ice maker cycle in the kitchen. Mom blinked fast like she was trying to keep rain from landing. Finn's mouth opened and closed. Dad pointed at the truck like I'd parked something obscene on the lawn. "After everything we've done," he said, his voice so bright it hurt. "This is how you thank us." I reached into my backpack, pulled out a plain envelope, and put it on the table where we have hosted more birthdays than I can count. Inside was a sheet with my new address and a printed summary of transfers from a decade I sometimes couldn't believe I had survived. 105,000 is an ordinary-looking number until you stack it next to memories of microwave noodles and a coat you kept another year because it was still mostly there. Dad's face changed shade by shade like the sun moving behind a cloud. Mom's eyes filled and spilled. Finn stared at the total and then at me as if he were trying to reconcile two different languages. "You've been hiding money," Dad said. "You've been hiding from your family." The old reflex, a need to explain, to justify, to make the room safe, rose up like a phantom and then passed through me without landing. "I've been paying to keep the lights on," I said. "I'm telling you the truth. I'm not paying anymore." The words were so simple they surprised me. They were a door propped open with a brick. I didn't stay long. I hugged my mother in a careful way that made room for both of us. I squeezed Finn's shoulder. I nodded at Dad because there was nowhere in the space to put anything else. Then I climbed into the truck and drove the familiar turns in reverse down streets where I'd learned to ride a bike past hedges I'd trimmed as a teenager for neighbors who tipped in warm cookies and compliments. Laurel Street was quieter than Hyde Park in the late morning, a kind of hush that felt like permission. I backed the truck into the short driveway and opened my own front door. The room smelled like new paint and clean wood. I set the suitcases down and listened to the house accept their weight. The mattress arrived shortly after, then a small sofa, then the desk I'd ordered with a click that felt like a promise. When the last delivery driver left, I stood in the middle of the living room and realized that freedom sometimes sounds like nothing at all. Loneliness walked in with its shoes off and sat on the floor next to me. It didn't try to make conversation, it just breathed. I made coffee in a dented French press and drank it by the back window, watching sunlight reach for the violets and the violets reach back. The quiet made me dizzy in a way that wasn't unpleasant. A soft knock came, 2 beats and a pause. On the porch stood a woman with a tin of cookies and a smile that had seen a lot and decided to keep going anyway. "I'm Maggie from next door," she said. I saw the truck. "Welcome." She handed me the tin without ceremony, then pointed at the patch of flowers with casual pride. "Those come back every year no matter what." We talked about trash pickup and the best place for breakfast tacos, and when she left, I realized I hadn't had a conversation that gentle in months. That night, after I'd assembled a bed frame with the kind of focus people reserve for surgery, I sat cross-legged on the rug and opened my laptop. I scanned my budget, adjusted a line or two, and stared at the total like you stare at a horizon you thought was for other people. My phone buzzed on the floor. Messages stacked up in a row I didn't open right away. I knew at least one of them would be from home, carrying a tone that would pull on the oldest ropes in me. I let the screen go dark. The violets held their color in the last light. The house made small settling noises the way new places do. Somewhere in the neighborhood a dog barked and was answered. A car door closed. The air moved. The porch swing out front shifted a fraction, then stilled as if to say it would only move when the wind asked. I lay back and looked at the ceiling and decided that a clean beginning is never quiet for long, but that quiet is the only way I can hear myself choose who I'm going to be. Tomorrow I'd go back to the office and sign whatever HR put in front of me and pick up a couple of things at the hardware store and return the U-Haul and make a grocery list that looked like a person lived here. Tonight I'd let the house learn my name. And if anyone wanted to know how the family would manage without my paycheck under their roof, I'd tell them the only true thing I had left to say: people find their footing when the ground is real. By midweek my phone was a crowded hallway. The first text came from a high school friend who still lives 3 blocks from Hyde Park. "Heard you bailed on your family." That true. Then another lighter but sharper. "So you're doing the whole cut them off thing. Must be nice to be heartless." Word travels faster than traffic in our neighborhood. It doesn't need facts, just a familiar last name and a story that fits the way people like to feel about themselves. A data wave, I tried to keep my head in code and logs in the comfort of a clean query. The office hum had a way of sanding down noise, but I could feel whispers sticking to me like lint. A teammate asked if I'd moved casual breezy, then pivoted to a meeting agenda before I could answer, and I was grateful for the pivot. At lunch, I took my sandwich to the balcony and watched heat blur the skyline, knowing that across town a handful of porches had already decided who I was. At Joe's Coffee later, Nico slid me a mug and a look that made room for the truth. "You didn't abandon anyone," he said. "You picked yourself up off a floor and stepped outside. That's called survival, not betrayal." The words landed like cold water on a hot plate, hissed and settled. He asked about the new place. I told him the violets were hanging on, and the quiet felt earned. When he went to help a customer, I checked my phone again and found a message from Mom. It wasn't "Are you okay?" It wasn't "How's the house?" It was "Come back for a few nights, your father can't stand the neighbors staring." I read it 3 times, each sentence shorter than the last, and felt that old ache rise in me, the one that wants to make the room comfortable no matter the cost. I set the phone face down and finished my coffee slowly, not because it was good, it was, but because I needed time to decide who I was going to be when I stood up. That evening, unpacking a box of plates on Laurel Street, I glanced at my phone long enough to see Finn's post flash by. New sneakers, spotless white, captioned with 2 words, "Thanks fam." It would have been nothing if not for the moment last month when I'd wired money under the heading urgent bill, the kind you pay with one hand while the other hand shakes. I stared at the photo until the edges of the screen fuzzed, then put the phone down and washed a single plate in a sink that didn't judge me. Love and resentment can share a table without speaking. They can look past each other and still leave a tip. After dark, I let the TV keep me company. A game flickered into a commercial that might as well have been a mirror, new interface, brighter colors, odds crawling like ants across the bottom of the screen, a promise that everything hard could be solved by prediction and nerve. I remembered the angle of my father's neck when a bet was live, the way the room went quiet around his focus. For a moment I felt the pull less toward money than toward the certainty that money pretends to offer. I turned the volume down until the ad mouthed silently at me, then hit power and sat in the dim light until my eyes adjusted. I thought about inheritance that isn't genetic so much as rehearsed reactions learned in the dark, patterns practiced until they look like instinct. I found the notebook I keep near the couch and wrote a single line hard enough to carve the page beneath it. If I give in now, I lose myself for good. The next day, the rumor grew legs. A neighbor's cousin told a co-worker who told a friend who DM'd me to say the street was buzzing and maybe I should apologize first, just to keep the peace. I typed and erased 3 versions of the same sentence and sent none of them. At the office, a manager congratulated me on the move and asked if I needed time off to settle in. I said no, and meant it. The more hours I put into work that had a beginning, middle, and end, the more I remembered my own shape. Late that night, alone in my living room, I let myself feel the isolation fully. It wasn't empty. It was precise. Everyone's expectations had left the house, and the echo they made on their way out told me exactly how large they had been. Before bed, I stood at the back window and watched the street go soft. A cat ghosted along a fence. Somewhere, a screen door closed with a clap that sounded like a period at the end of a sentence. I turned off the last lamp and let the quiet fold over me. In the dark, I pictured the old house and the meter on the side clicking forward into 0, imagined the refrigerator defrosting into a stubborn puddle. I knew what came next because pressure has a choreography. When the lights go out, the story we've been avoiding stops, ducking behind furniture. It stands in the doorway and waits. I fell asleep with my jaw unclenched for the first time in months and woke with the same line from the notebook in my head, steady as a handrail. If there's a mirror in this city, it isn't in any neighbor's opinion or a comment thread or a glass storefront on South Congress. It's in the moment you choose your life with both hands and accept that someone will always mistake that for cruelty. And still, as the sun pushed up behind the trees, a separate thought formed beneath all that certainty. When the power at Hyde Park gets cut, how will they arrive and who will I be when they do? They showed up on a heat-heavy afternoon with the kind of urgency that turns a knock into an alarm. I opened the door to the 3 faces I know better than my own, and a 4th panic wearing all of them. The power at Hyde Park was out. The fridge had warmed. The house smelled like something leaving. Finn, cheeks flushed and voice thin, said the band had suspended him until he could pay his share for the studio. Mom's palms were open as if to show she was carrying nothing but air. Dad's eyes skipped past me, landed on the room, and hardened when he realized what kind of room it was. So this is where the money went. he said, sweeping an arm at the walls as if paint and wood were strangers we'd invited to dinner. He didn't have to say the other words. They were all over his face: secrets, betrayal, selfish. I stepped aside and let them in. The air conditioning hummed the way relief does when it knows it has a job. I asked if they wanted water. Nobody answered. I brought glasses anyway. We sat at the little table I'd bought online and assembled with a screwdriver that blistered my thumb. Dad started first, not with a question, but with a verdict. You hid this from us. You watched us drown and bought yourself a boat. The old me would have met him in the current, would have offered my life jacket and called it love. The person I had become reached for a folder in the drawer and laid paper on the table like a deck that doesn't allow tricks. Transfers listed month by month, year by year, a simple chronology of what it takes to be the dependable one. The number at the bottom had the same gravity it always has when seen in ink, 105,000. Mom made a sound I'll remember longer than any word. Finn stared at the page, then at me, then at the page again, recalibrating something private. I didn't raise my voice. I named facts. The money I'd wired, the bills I'd covered, the interest I'd paid by existing between paycheck and need. Then I named what they already knew: the account Dad used, the bets that blinked on his screen at all hours, the 5,000 borrowed from a man who waters his lawn at dusk and worries about everyone on the block. Mom went pale the way sky does before rain. Finn's chin dropped, not in shame alone, but in the heavy weight of finally seeing the whole picture without its frame. Mom cried. Not theatrically, like a dam that had been held past its design. She said she'd known pieces and smoothed them over, convinced herself she was buying time, convinced that keeping the neighbors from asking questions was the same as keeping the family from falling apart. Finn spoke in a rush about nights he'd walked into the kitchen and seen a phone cupped like a secret about the way Mom had told him to let it go because some truths don't survive daylight in our zip code. Dad bristled shoulders, pulling up around a lifetime of defenses. If you'd sent a little more, he said, I could have fixed it. A sentence like that has a way of clarifying everything. It takes the temperature of a room and turns it to stone. I breathed once and put words in the air that had been waiting years to be spoken. Here are your choices. I laid them out slowly, not as punishment but as a path. A real budget. Meetings that do not pretend betting is a hobby. Contributions from each of them that reflect reality instead of reputation. Or the other option, handle it on your own, without me as a safety net you refuse to see while you're standing on it. I told them I would pay for one night at the South Congress Hotel so they could sleep, eat, and decide in a place with clean sheets and no ghosts. It wasn't a rescue. It was a pause button in a house that needed silence to hear itself think. Dad laughed once, a sharp sound with no humor in it, then looked past me toward the door as if there might be a different answer on the porch. Mom nodded slowly, like a person who has finally found the word for what she's been feeling. Finn rubbed his hands over his face and said nothing. I booked the room from my phone and texted Mom the confirmation number. She thanked me with a voice so small I could barely hear it. When they left, Maggie from next door pretended to be checking her mailbox and then turned toward me with a question in her eyes she didn't ask. I gave her a little wave that said we're okay and we're not both at once. She went back inside and the street resumed its regular breathing. I stood in my living room and watched the light move from one wall to another, a slow procession that reminded me time doesn't hurry just because we want it to. In the quiet after they drove away, I felt something unclench in my spine. Not victory, not relief, just the firm landing of a boundary that had finally met the floor. I washed the glasses and set them on the rack to dry. I turned off the ceiling fan and listened to the house be a house. Later, I sat at the window with a notebook open and a pen resting in the crease waiting. Outside, the violets held their color without needing anyone to clap for them. Inside, the chapter that had run too long found its period. Tomorrow would bring a decision I couldn't control, and for the first time in years, that thought didn't scare me. The power had gone out on one story. Another was learning how to keep the lights on without burning down the room.